the second of our videos on switch statements, and it's about default behavior. If you look at these two programs, the one that uses the switch and the one that uses the if, you'll see that there's actually a bit of a difference between them. In the if version, we've declared the variable line color and we haven't set it equal to anything. But down the bottom of our if statement, there's an else without an if. This is a sort of catch-all. If none of these things up here are true, do this one. So this one essentially says, right, if none of these lines are the value, then we're going to be setting it to the word error, some kind of error handling. If you look in the version which uses a switch, you'll see that there isn't anything like this. Basically, there's just a list of cases here, and at the top instead we assign line color to be equal to the text value error. That's because in this version of this switch statement here, if none of these things in here are true, it doesn't do anything. So if it gets to the end, and if we, for example, set line name to lemon, then none of these cases are true, therefore nothing is executed. Therefore at the end of it, what's the value of line color? Well, it's this value error that we set it to in the first place. There is a way that though that we can do something about that, and a better way, a more sort of stylistically better way, is instead of setting this to error here, we can use the keyword default, and we can put a default case down here. So I'm just going to type in the word default, colon, I'm going to add in some error behavior. First of all, notice that this is a classic case of where you need this break statement at the end of a case, as a switch statement, because I'm now adding something else on the end, and if I hadn't put this break in here, even though it's not strictly necessary because it was the last thing, then it's easy to forget to put it in and end up with something that's wrong. And again, I'm going to put the break in even though Java doesn't need it for style reasons and quality reasons. Now we've set this line name to lemon. Line color isn't set to anything. Lemon doesn't match any of these cases here, so we should do the default case. And that is in fact what we do. Okay, so generally speaking, most case switch statements would have a default option at the end. Not all of them. You may want one to do nothing if none of these things are true. But very commonly you have a default, and stylistically it's good practice to put it at the end because it matches the case with an if-else statement where the else, the catch-all, if nothing else is true, do this version occurs. Now, there's a point to be made about Java and the initialization of variables. So we've declared this variable here called line color, and down the bottom we're using this variable called line color and we're printing it out. And the only thing between these things is this if statement. Okay. Now this if statement will do one of these things here, we hope, but it's possible to write an if statement that doesn't do any of these things here at all. Now in this case we've set line name to be central, so we're definitely going to be doing this one, and we'll expect line color to be orange. But suppose we don't set this to be an initial value, and suppose we take out this else at the end here, just simply delete that. Now if I save this and try and compile it, then it doesn't compile. And the error is variable line color might not have been initialized. What Java's telling us is that it is not certain that this variable here, which we did not give a value initially, is actually going to have been set between here and here. And the reason is because there's an if statement that doesn't have a final catch-all, and if all else fails, do this. So its view is that, well, all of these could be false, and then we'll end up with line color not being set to a value, and you're going to try and print it out, and that will cause your program to crash. Now you might say, well, of course it's going to be set to something, we've set it to be central here, and that's true, but Java isn't always going to be able to work out what the value of a variable is, and it's not reasonable to expect it to be clever enough for that. So if this happens, sometimes you do actually have to set things to be equal to dummy values. Okay, in this case, that if I put the value error in there, then this will solve the problem, simply because now line color is definitely set to something, and if I save that and compile it again, then it works. Here it makes sense. This is a real case where it's possible that we might end up with a value that doesn't have an actual initialization at any point, and therefore we're printing out something with no known value. Sometimes you'll be writing programs where you know as a human who can reason that yes, it definitely will be given a value, but Java is going to be saying nope, don't believe you, not certain. And sometimes you just have to set it to some kind of dummy value to make the compiler let you proceed. The same incidentally works with the switch statement. If I take out the default case at the bottom there, and now again we've got no initialization for line color, and because we've got no default case, it's possible that none of these things are true, and in fact in this case they're not true because we've set this value to lemon and there isn't a lemon in there. So I now save this one and I compile it. Oops, if I compile it, not try and run it, then I'm getting exactly the same error. The variable line color might not have been initialized. And again, in this case, I can force it to be okay by setting this equal to some dummy value or error, or in this case, I could put the actual default case back in. But if this error occurs, then you essentially going to have to use your judgment in setting something, even though you think, well, I'm definitely going to be overwriting that value later on. I know I am. The logic of my program tells me I am. The compiler's not as clever as you, basically.